California wine and grape industry has had 30 years of positive growth, year after year of growth. And we saw this last year. There was an estimated 400,000 tons of grapes left on the vine in 2023. They couldn't sell them. It was never harvested. It was never pruned.
So it had the grapes, people just gave up.
They just gave up.
California is home to some of the world's most renowned wine regions, like Napa Valley and Sonoma and Lodi, making it a top global wine producer. But the state wine industry is facing a significant slowdown in sales. Wineries are filled with unsold inventory, and grape growers are struggling to find buyers for their grapes, even with a steep discount.
I've had multiple farmers in the last week reach out and other winemakers saying that, hey, there's a vineyard here in Sonoma that the farmer can't find a buyer and they're giving the grapes away. All you need to do is come and pick the grapes out of the vineyard and you can have them. And those are vineyards that traditionally would cost upward of $5,000 or $6,000 a ton, maybe even more.
Some of our older growers that have been farming, 60, 70 years, even some cases, and they say this is the worst they've ever seen.
Today, we'll look into the world of winery in California, what's behind this slowdown and downturn in the state's wine industry, and how it's impacting everyone, from farmers to winemakers. I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Stuart, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
I'm happy to be here.
We want to talk to you about the wine industry in California. You guys are hurting now, right? The industry is not doing well. Can you tell us what's happening?
Well, it's one of the most challenging times we've seen in the last 40 to 50 years in the California wine industry. Basically, there's declining sales over the last 2 years that's translating into backed up inventory at wineries, reduced sales, which then translates back to the farmers and growers and less demand for the grapes. Well, let me back it up a little bit here. And so the California wine and grape industry has had 30 years of positive growth, year after year of growth, up until about 2018. And we started to see the California and the U.S. wine market flatten out. Much of this growth was driven by the baby boomer generation that in the early 90s really started adopting wine consumption as their alcoholic beverage of choice. A lot of it was because of the reported health benefits of moderate wine consumption related to heart health, and a story that came out of 60 Minutes in 1991 in Morley Safer about why do the French live so much longer when they eat all this high fatty food, they smoke cigarettes all the time, and they drink a lot of wine. And it was, the correlation was between the red wine consumption they had and their heart health. And so Americans started drinking wine like crazy in the 90s, and we saw this incredible decade of growth through the 90s. But today, the baby boomers are starting to come of age, and health effects that are telling them, I need to not drink as much alcohol or drink less wine. Some of them are passing away. And so what we're seeing demographically in the U.S. wine market is that there is a slowdown in wine consumption, and the younger generations are not adopting it at the same rate as the older generations were. So there's a lot of factors at play here, both demographically and with consumption patterns, but also when you look at the overall global supply of wine.
Is it harder for California wine to compete?
Well, California is probably one of the most expensive places to do business in the world, and we've seen an acceleration of regulations and costs over the past decade that has really compromised and pinched the profit margins for California growers and vintners, and I think many businesses that operate in the ag sector like we do. One of the challenges when you're a farmer, you can't pick up your business and move to a place that is cheaper to do business. So you are stuck with where your land is, and it's important to take care of your land. And when you can't sell your grapes, and we saw this last year, there was an estimated 400,000 tons of grapes left on the vine in 2023. Many of those vineyards were just abandoned. And we have those in our area, and they're throughout California, where the vineyard is still sitting there. It was never harvested, it was never pruned.
So it had the grapes, people just gave up.
They just gave up. They couldn't sell them, and then they didn't have the money to tear them out and redevelop into another product or commodity. One of the bigger challenges we're facing in all of California agriculture is most of California agriculture is struggling right now, so there aren't a lot of alternative crops to switch into. And so if you were to pull out your vineyard, the next question is, what do I go into? And so many our farmers are struggling with those questions today. And we have more farms up for sale now because you've got a generation of growers that are just like, I'm done. I can't, go back to the bank and borrow more money to develop a new crop, and when the outlook is not very good.
And why do you think this happened? Do you think there's also a lot of competition, or is there a lot of over?
So there's several factors in play here, and I think there are the demand effects that we just talked about with slowing consumption. That's part of it. I think the bigger part of it too is the competition from imports. And one of the big changes we've seen in California is that our largest grape buyers, our largest wineries, have shifted a portion of their production to sourcing cheap overseas bulk wine. And so there's millions and millions of gallons pouring in to California from all over the world, Australia, Chile, Southern Europe, and it's undercutting California grape growers. We had, I think, in the last 5 years, I was looking at my estimates before I came on here, that there's 1.3 billion bottles of bulk wine imported in the last 5 years. And what this is doing, it's basically pulling out the bottom end of the market for California grape growers, and so there's no outlets for them to go. And at the end of the day, you're just left with the grapes on the vine, which is, you're going to go out of business real quick that way.
Is this the first time that you've seen something like this?
So this practice began back around 2004, and you can trace it to actually a federal policy that was put in place, which complicates the story even more. There's a trade regulation, it's called duty drawback, which basically subsidizes imported wine. And they are able to bring in a lot of this cheap imported wine tax-free, so it's not paying the alcohol taxes, or it's getting its alcohol taxes refunded. So it's created an incentive for the biggest California wineries to import cheap wine. The trick is they have to find a matching export. But the problem is it's going to a few of the large buyers that control the grape market, and it's leaving a lot of producers, without a good home. So that began around 2004, and we've seen a steady growth of cheap imports coming into the United States, and we've seen California wine lose about 15% of its market share over the last 20 years in the U.S. market. And so there is a lot of competition, and you couple that with the cost of production here is we can only go so much lower on price in order to be sustainable and survive.
Now, you mentioned that people had these grapes on and they didn't even want to pick them, right?
Yeah.
How much of it was there?
Well, it's hard to say. Some of the industry experts estimate that last year there was 400,000 tons that were unpicked, that were left on the vine. That's the equivalent of 50 to 60,000 acres. I don't think I've ever seen it as bad as it is right now, and I've spoken with some of our older growers that have been farming, 60, 70 years, even some cases, and they say this is the worst they've ever seen. That the large wine companies would always come in and at least offer them some money for their grapes to keep them alive and keep them surviving. But, today...
So they didn't get any offers, probably.
Right now there's a lot of grapes, they've spent all year farming them, and they have no place to go with them.
So the cost of picking them is higher than what they can probably get.
In some cases, there's some wineries coming in with very low ball offers, low pricing, and so the cost of picking is greater than the cost of revenue they would get from them. And in other cases, there's just no buyers completely. And so they're just sitting on the vine waiting and hoping that somebody will be able to come along and help them out and take the grapes. But it's not looking great for some of the varieties and some of the growers. We've done a great job of building global recognition for California wine as high quality, incredible diversity, really great flavors and potential. But we're competing in a global marketplace, And one of the big challenges too is that we're competing against traditional European wine regions that they subsidize their farming and they subsidize their wine grape production. It's really interwoven culturally in these countries. And so when their farmers struggle, the EU steps in and helps them out. And right now, across Europe, we're seeing what they call crisis distillation, which is the government going in and buying up excess supplies from the growers, so they're getting some money for it, and then distilling that into alcohol, which is used for industrial purposes and other purposes like that. The problem with this type of subsidy is it keeps that production in the ground and doesn't allow the market forces to correct itself and balance out the global supply.
So next year they will come back.
They will come
and
back,
there might be excess supply, right?
And the other challenge we've got is the United States market is the #1 market for volume and value in the world. So everyone wants to compete here. Everyone wants to take a piece of the market share. And the really frustrating thing for the California farmers is our largest grape buyers, our largest California wineries are helping them by going overseas and buying the cheap and expensive wines that are undercutting the California producers. And the story gets even worse and more complicated because a lot of this bulk wine coming in shows up on products in grocery stores labeled as American. And the federal regulations allow you to blend in up to 25% foreign wine and still call it an American wine. And so many consumers who really want to support American producers may not even know that they are buying a foreign sourced wine.
How much is it? 25%?
Up to 25%.
Okay.
It can still carry the American appellation. Or
Even if it has 25% foreign grapes.
One of the other frustrating things for me is I walk into our local supermarkets and you'll see floor stacks of this foreign wine sitting there, and our growers are struggling to sell their grapes, and our grocery stores right in Lodi, right in here in California, have all this foreign wine in it, and you can't even seem to get them to answer the phone and address these questions and support their local farmers and their local businesses. One of the big pushes for me and why I've come out and started talking about this is that I think we talk a lot in California about sustainability. We talk a lot about environmental and social policies. And at the end of the day, the foundational values of that are based on community and supporting your community. And if your community is struggling, then everybody's struggling. And so investing in your community is more than just sponsoring the local softball team or baseball team. It really means investing in your community. And when our largest vintners, largest wineries are going overseas and buying cheap wine instead of buying it from the local growers, they're not investing in their local communities the way that they really should be. And if we are going to thrive here in California, we need to really have a community-first approach to things and really support our local economies and support our local communities. That effort and those values then trickle down throughout the whole economy and lifts everyone up. We're based in the Central Valley, and we have chronically higher unemployment than other parts of California. And these business practices are taking away jobs from those that most need it.
Because the people that are going to do the picking, they don't have a job.
They're going to do the picking, the tractor driving, the paperwork. The whole supply chain is being affected by this. The fertilizer companies that support us, the trucking companies that haul the grapes, everyone is being impacted by this.
Now, does it have a higher profit margin, if they go that direction, the way they're doing it internationally? Is that what's happening?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a profit-driven motive because they can source grapes or bulk wine cheaper overseas and bring it in. That may make initial business sense, but if it puts your local community out of business, it doesn't make a long-term success because there's no guarantee that excess supply is going to be available down the road. The other thing it does too, and it's hard to kind of correlate this exactly, but is, when your competitors are bringing in cheap wine and lowering the price, then you have to do the same too. So it's creating almost a race to the bottom at the value end of the wine market that's taking away the profits for everybody. And so it's pushing volume instead of profitability. More is not always better. But if we can, produce less wine, but sell at higher quality price points, I think we'll all be more successful. And that's kind of the place we need to get. But it's a challenge when we're competing with all these other factors and you're competing in a market that has really slowed down. The other important thing to understand in the wine market too is we're still working through in the pandemic. And so people overbought, the consumers overbought during the pandemic, the retailers kind of overbought, and the distributors did. And so there's a lot of excess inventory in the system right now that has led to decreased, year after year negative sales the last 2 years. And so a lot of producers are kind of, panicking a little bit about that, because if they shipped, 10,000 cases last year and all of a sudden their sales are on track for 7,500 cases, but they were projecting to be selling 12,000 cases, you've got 5,000 cases of excess supply that you have to figure out how you're going to deal with. And the wine business is very much a capital intensive business, so it requires you investing a lot up front. The other part of this too, which is the tourism part of California too. I mean, tourism in California has been struggling, and a lot of direct-to-consumer wine sales are driven by visitation. We've been doing a little bit better in Lodi than some of the other parts of California. We're still a discovery place, and our price points are a little more accessible and approachable, but everybody's feeling that pinch right now, as simultaneously as their costs have come up quite a bit. And so as your costs are coming up and your sales are going down, the profits are being stripped of the industry, and you don't have the money to reinvest. You don't have the money to hire new employees. And so as a small business owner, you have to be very cautious in how you move forward.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China, and now is starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. I'm sure you guys have been talking how to fix this.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think on the first fix we need is we need Congress to fix this loophole that allows foreign wine to come in with a subsidy and not pay their alcohol taxes. That's the first solution. The second solution is we need to refocus our efforts on supporting our communities and really embrace the sustainable values that are the foundation of the California industry. I think the third option is at the consumer level, and this is where you come into play, and this is where everyone that enjoys wine comes into play. It's like when you go into your grocery store, you look at the label and see where it comes from, and you ask your retailers, you ask your restaurants, you should be sourcing California wine. We want to see California wine here. We need to see American-made wine, 100% American-made wine. And I think if we can get consumers to think about that, it can make a difference. And I think that is foundational to moving and changing our situation.
As we are gathering more information, we're seeing that there's a lot of families involved in the farming. Can you tell us?
Yeah, so I grew up in the wine and grape business. When I was 2 months old, my parents purchased a piece of property, and they were told grapes would grow well on it. They didn't know anything about wine, so they planted grapes. My dad had grew up farming. We celebrated our 50th harvest this year. Those first crop came into ripeness in 1974. And over those 50 years, I was always good free labor. So I grew up working in the vineyards. When my mom and dad started our winery back in 1981, I was free labor in the winery. I really learned this industry from the ground up. And, over the years, we've probably, if there's a problem that can happen, we've had it and we've worked our way through it. Years ago, my dad got into, making wine because he had a winery file bankruptcy on him one year, and then the previous year a winery had broken the contract right before harvest, and he was left trying to figure out how to sell the grapes. And he's like, I'm gonna just make wine and sell wine. At least then I have more control over my destiny. And so that's how we got into making wine and selling wine. And it hasn't been easy, I will say, but we're still here today. California has its challenges, but I'm not going anywhere, and I want to help make it better, and we need everyone else's help to do that too.
You mentioned there is a sense of community in the farming. How does it work?
When we moved our winery to Lodi, actually, our own vineyard was dying and we were without grapes, and we actually didn't have a lot of money, and we had growers give us grapes, and they said, we said we can't pay for them, and they said, don't worry about that. When you have money, you pay for them. And to this day, we continue to work with those growers, and it's been almost a 30-year partnership, and they take some wine from us, we take some grapes from us, and then we settle the bill at the end of the season and work it out. There's no written contract, it's all done on a handshake. And that's why farming is important to California. These values extend out into the broader community. And, we need our agricultural community to thrive in California, because when the agricultural community thrives, the communities around it thrive too. I'm not quite sure what our future is going to look like, but one thing I know is that farmers are resilient people, and we are going to find a way to succeed. We're going to have to work twice as hard, but we're going to continue working at it and pushing forward and make it successful.
Stuart Spencer with Lodi Growers, it was great to have you on California Insider. Hopefully everything will recover for your community.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and the time you gave us.
Patrick, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're a wine expert, right? Is there anything special with the California wine?
California is so unique. Yeah, it's the biggest wine producing state in our country. It's ideally kind of a perfect climate for grape growing. We have a lot of sunshine, it's warm days, it's very cool nights, especially on the coastal parts of California. We grow grapes from all the way at the border of Oregon, all the way to essentially the border of Mexico. It's a very unique climate with a lot of varying soil types. There's sandy alluvial soils, there's limestone, there's granite, there's so many things that exist in other wine regions all over the world, but to have it in such a close proximity, it's very unique. The wines being produced in California, a bit was starting to be produced before Prohibition. Prohibition obviously kind of threw a wrench in the works for California wine, but post-Prohibition, people like Robert Mondavi and Charles Krug and other people that kind of loved European wine started to look at this area in California and why it would be kind of a perfect situation to make wine. And so we grew as a state and a producer of wine, and we always kind of played second fiddle to the wines of Europe, the wines of France and Italy and Spain. And as time has gone on, there were a lot of moments in wine that changed things for California. There was a British sommelier named Stephen Spurrier, who lived in Paris, came to California because he had heard amazing things were happening with the wines from this area, and visited wineries in Napa Valley and brought bottles back to France and to Paris, where his wine shop was, and did a blind tasting against the great wines of Europe in 1976. And the wines from California defeated the European wines in this blind tasting, which kind of put California on the map. And then there was things like the rise of wine critics like Robert Parker, who also really kind of shined a spotlight on California and the wines from the area. And then there was a book written by John Bonnet called The New California, which was about producers that were kind of doing things differently. So moments in time that have continued to elevate California. But even during all those times even during the high times, there was always this kind of feeling that California wine was good, but not as good as European wine. And so now we're in a moment where wine consumption across the world is deflating, and in our country, people are drinking less wine. And the problem is that we have already a greater amount of wine coming from other places into this country for consumption, and as we deflate the amount of wine that we're drinking, California wine is suffering more, because there is this feeling that California wine, A, is not as good as European wine, even though all these moments that I just mentioned in time where we've proven that we do produce world-class wines, but also the fact that California wines are looked at as being more expensive than the European counterparts, which is so many reasons that I could go into as to why that is. And then also there's been a lot of untrue reports that focus only on a very certain dynamic of farming that's happening here, where there's a lot of pesticides like Roundup being put in the ground, but not reflecting on the fact that there are a huge amount of farmers that are farming organically and not using these pesticides. But there's been a blanketed statement that California wines contain these chemicals, which is untrue. Not all California wine does, and it's not true that all European wines don't, but this has been kind of a broadcasted thing as well. So a couple of these things have started to affect the sales in California. And then if you look at the subsidies that go into agriculture in Europe, agriculture for grapes, it's looked at as an important part of what, and it is because they export a lot of wine here. And so there's subsidies that are given by the government for agricultural farming of grapes. In this country, the main thing we subsidize is corn. There's no subsidies for our farmers who grow grapes. Once again, because it's not looked at as an agricultural product that matters, but also that we're creating a cultural moment that wine shouldn't be painted in an evil light, and I think that it has.
A lot of people consume wine as more like a family getting together with friends. It's not a drink that people do for parties, right? It's more of a
I mean, I think every form of alcohol can be abused, and it is a chemical, and it can be a dangerous one if it's not consumed appropriately. But I think, a friend of mine, another sommelier turned winemaker, a guy named Richard Betts, he used to say, wine is a grocery. In Europe, that's the way it's looked at, right? It is part of sitting the table. It's part of the family meal. I mean, even the fact that there isn't a drinking age per se in Europe, and the kids, at some point are shown wine to be able to drink responsibly as part of a meal. I think in the realm of alcohol, has a different cultural reference than other forms of alcohol.
If you were to promote California wine to our audience, how would you promote it?
I would say this is the most amazing time for California wine. Never has there been a more diverse group of people making wine and farming grapes in the state that there is right now. There's never been a bigger emphasis on farming responsibly with organic and biodynamic practices. There's never been a moment where people are more focused about healthy practices in the winery itself and using natural ferments and making wine naturally. There's never been a moment like there is right now. We are not only producing some of the best wines we ever have, but we're a group of winemakers who are trying to focus on being environmentally friendly in the way that we produce wine, which I think if it's not supported, if people don't respond to it by supporting us, we might regress to something that wasn't as responsible. Right now, the greater wine community in California is feeling a decompression in sales. There's a lot of factors that people kind of want to identify why it's happening. The why is super compelling, and I think it's important to identify, but a lot of times the why isn't something we can change. It's a moment where a lot of us are producing a lot less wine because we are afraid of overproducing. In the last, since COVID and the lockdown and a moment where people were drinking a lot more at home, we saw an increase in sales. And because making wine the turnaround isn't so quick, right? If I want to have something in market based on what I'm farming now, I need to think about what I'm making now. It won't actually hit the market for a year to a year and a half. So understanding making what I need to make as far as quantities or varietals or styles of wine that I think is going to be a trend in a year and a half from now, it's kind of a complicated thing. So we're all in a moment right now where a year and a half ago, we were producing at a certain level because we saw a trajectory that we thought was going to be consistent. The problem is that a year ago, things started to change, and at this point we kind of already had put ourselves in motion to a certain amount of production, and now we find ourselves a year later with a glut of inventory, and that's the biggest problem that we're all facing as winemakers. We as winemakers have wine in our cellar that we thought we would have been sold through at this point, and we're not. And so what a reaction to that is, if you have an over inventory, anyone who's got a business degree would tell you it's time to start producing less. You need to work through your inventory. The only problem is, it's not like we're producing something that's a machine that you just turn on and off. It's a planet that's turning. It's seasons that are coming. It's farmers that have grapes in the ground that are all dependent on this. And you can't put the brakes on that. So by all of us producing less wine right now, the domino effect is falling on our farmers. So our farmers are now put in a situation where they have grapes that are unsold on the vine, which is kind of the most tragic thing, because they have two choices, just like we had two choices. We could either have pushed on and produced the same way we were, or we could have produced less.
Offline, you were telling us that grape growers are actually giving away their grape. Can you tell us what's happening?
Right now, we're at the kind of mid to end portion of harvest for our area. And farmers that traditionally had commitments for grapes this year didn't. And I think we're trying to hopefully figure out if they could find another path, or hoping that somebody would come about and eventually ask for the grapes or through the network of people. As in the past, I think traditionally that's how it works. If you lose a contract, if you wait long enough or if you put the word out through the network, you'll find somebody that's interested. And this year, I've had multiple farmers in the last week reach out and other winemakers saying that, hey, there's a vineyard here in Sonoma that the farmer can't find a buyer and they're giving the grapes away. All you need to do is come and pick the grapes out of the vineyard and you can have them. Wow. And those are vineyards that traditionally would cost upward of $5,000 or $6,000 a ton, maybe even more. Now farmers have to decide, do I want to bet that our things are going to get better and that I'm going to be able to sell grapes next year? Or is it time for me to count my losses and to rip up my vineyards and plant something else that I know I can sell? And unfortunately, a lot of farmers are choosing to walk away from grape farming and to start producing other things like nuts and other things that grow, in the middle of the country, which is going to be a negative effect because once things get better, which I believe they will, now there'll be a lack of grapes available, which is going to drive up the price of grapes because there'll be a demand for it, which is going to drive up the price of wine, which is going to once again make California wine more expensive. So it's a very dangerous moment that if we don't address the problems, we might be in an even worse situation in 3 or 4 years.
Patrick Cappiello, California winemaker. It was great to have you on California Insider.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
Craig, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're a California grape grower.
Yeah.
And we're hearing that California grape growers are struggling at this time. Can you tell us what's happening?
The grapes are a permanent crop. They don't just, you don't have to replant them every year. You plant a vineyard, it takes 3 years for it to come into production. And then your goal is for that to be in the ground for 20 to 25 years. There's a lot of vineyards that are 20 to 25 years old that need to be redeveloped anyway. And so if we start moving forward with removal and we have other opportunities to plant other crops, then we absolutely should do that. Going back and trying to do something as in redeveloping it right back to a vineyard when it's already been proven to us that wine sales are tapering off and people are consuming less alcohol in general, that would be silly on our part as a grower to move in that direction.
Craig, we've been hearing that there is a new trend with younger people wanting more healthier products and they're not drinking as much alcohol. Is this a concern for you guys?
No, I mean, this slowdown in consumption isn't just about the United States of America. This is a worldwide situation, and we are in a worldwide oversupply of fruit and wine and grapes. And so this isn't something that can just be taken care of by growers in California. This has to be looked at on a grander scale, as where this is being done across the world. You have the Southern Hemisphere, especially in South America, where you have a lot of grapes planted. They're able to farm at the cost of farming an acre, or for them a hectare, is much less expensive than it is for us to farm that same acreage here. So they're able to produce quality fruit at a lower price, which clearly is enticing to the rest of the world. And it fits the bottle price point that a lot of buyers are interested in continuing to buy. And that's something that this isn't new. It's something that our industry, it's been a worldwide market since, the late 90s, where we're not just competing with ourselves. We are competing with European countries. We're competing with Australia. And yes, we're competing with South American countries as well. So in all, yes, this is an overall worldwide issue that has to get corrected. And there's too many smart people in our industry for this not to get corrected.
Craig, are you telling us that California growers are not able to compete with the international growers and other regions?
So when you look at the quality of fruit, which and then in turns returns to quality of the wine, you can't make good wine out of bad grapes. You can make bad wine out of good grapes, but you definitely can't make good wine out of bad grapes. So what we're trying to do in California is we're always trying to make the highest quality of wine for the grape that we have in place. Now, regionally, that can be different. It's not throwing anyone under the bus, but the quality in Fresno and Bakersfield is not the quality that you get in Lodi, Paso Robles area, Monte County, Mendocino County, Sonoma, and Napa. So the quality that is really being replaced, or the major areas of replacement by these other countries, really revolves around the Fresno, Bakersfield, and in the Valley. And now we're starting to kind of see that attack on Lodi fruit as well, where they're able to provide quality at a less price than what we can do the same quality in Lodi. And that has everything to do with, our regulation that we have in the state of California, our labor laws that we have in California, and the continued increase in minimum wage going up and up and up and up. And when you think about that how that relates to what we're doing back in the field, what we are paying in an hour, South American countries may be paying that employee in a day. And so when you start leveling out that playing field, it's not very level at all. So of course they can produce at a less price than what we can. One of the issues that I think a lot of us have in the industry, and it's not an issue, it's an observation that we see, and a lot of information that we hear on a regular basis is, we hear people talking about, I need to know where my wine's coming from. I need to know where my food's coming from. And if you need to know where your food's coming from and you want your food to come from where you live, it's going to cost you more money than if you're interested in just the price of food or the price of wine. If you're interested in just buying based on price, you are not going to be buying American products for the most part. You're not going to be able to buy American food. You're not going to be able to buy American wine because we can't compete when it comes to the worldwide market with countries such as in South America where their labor is much cheaper, or countries in Europe where they are partially subsidized by their government. So there has to be what we're looking for, and what we're trying to figure out is how do we equalize that playing field for California growers, California winemakers, and California wine brands to continue to compete with California wine.
Now, is it common for American winemakers to use international grapes and foreign grapes?
Well, that's a marketing trick that a lot of these wineries have really honed in on and are capable of doing. Is they might have foreign wine in an American appellated bottle of wine, and I know that sounds odd because if it says America on the bottle, you would think that that all of that wine or that fruit in that bottle would be from the United States of America. But yet in our country, you can put an American appellation on the wine and 25% of that wine or fruit can be from another country. We're the only country on earth that allows that type of stuff to happen. If it's a French bottle of wine, guess what? It's 100% French. So that is something that we have to deal with, but that could be a double-edged sword for us, potentially. That double-edged sword could be is that American winery might just say, well, you know what? Our consumer may or may not care whether it's an American product or not, as long as it's at the price point that they're looking to purchase at. And so when you're at a grocery store looking at the wine section, which can be a daunting thing to look at when you start talking about the amount of SKUs that are in our industry, you look at a shelf and you're like, there's 17 bottles of Cabernet here, all priced basically at the same exact price point, but they all have slightly different labels. One might say California, one might say American, one might not say anything. It might just say the winery name on it, but then you turn it to the back and it's a product of Chile or a product of Argentina or a product of Italy. But you would never know that until you turn to the back label on that bottle. And that's something that I think we're going to continue to deal with as long as we are having the pressures that we have as growers on what we can farm and at what price. And if we can't farm it at the price that meets that bottle price point, then they're going to replace us with foreign fruit. That's basically what it boils down to.
Craig, are farmers like you, are you guys reconsidering to grow grapes in California?
Well, I mean, farming's our livelihood. It's what we've done. I'm a fourth generation California farmer. I am third generation in this particular business of farming wine grapes. Prior to farming wine grapes, my grandfather farmed. My dad grew up on a farm in Delano where they farmed row crops. They farmed strawberries. They farmed cotton, all kinds of fruits and vegetables, as well as some oranges. Then my grandfather moved down to Southern California where he farmed avocados and citrus. And then he eventually, after that, moved to the Visalia area where he farmed walnuts, all prior to 1972, where he landed in Lodi and we started farming wine grapes. So since 1972, my family has been a wine grape grower. We have recently ventured again outside of the wine grape industry in the Lodi area and have planted some pistachios. Those pistachios will come to production in 2025. And we have intentions of planting more pistachios in 2025. We are looking at it region by region now where we farm. And if there is other opportunities to farm something besides wine grapes, we're going to evaluate those and see if it's something that we can be successful with. Pistachios is the one that we've kind of honed in on for now, and we will continue to do that. But all in all, it's my family's livelihood. It's what we know. It's the only thing that I know. My dad knows, he's farmed other things because he grew up on a farm in Delano. But it's what my family knows and my generation. And there's 5 of us in my generation that work for the family business, myself, my sister, and I have 3 cousins as well that we all work together hand in hand throughout the state of California. So yes, it's farming is our livelihood. It's something that, we hope to pass to the next generation. But we're going to have to see some changes in farming in California if that is going to be to determine if that's going to be possible. In general, we love what we do. And we're stewards of the land. We take care of our land, and we have every interest in preserving that land for our lifetime and my children's lifetime and hopefully my grandchildren's lifetime, that are not in existence yet. But yeah, there is so much going on in this wine industry right now that has to be figured out, and how we figure that out. The main thing that I think we as grape growers and winemakers, especially on the small winemaking side, is we are looking for our consumer to think California, to think American. We are thinking about our consumer to do what they preach, to follow in what they say and what they're talking about. And what we hear all the time is we need to know what we're drinking, we need to know what we're eating, and we need to know where it's coming from. And they want local. And if you want local and you want to know what you're drinking and you want to know what you're eating, the best way to do that is to buy Californian, especially if you're a Californian. Buy American wine, buy American food. When you go to the grocery store and you see this as a product of Mexico, or this is a product of Chile, or this is a product of Argentina when it comes to your fresh produce, you need to think about that. Why is that? Because that's not where our food used to come from. Our food has always been homegrown. And I think it's very important that we look at farming in the United States of America as the backbone of our country. It's really how our country was started. It was started by family farmers because you had to farm to survive. That was the way you ate. And we have gotten away from that. And I understand that that's going to happen over time. But if our food starts coming from other countries, we are no longer the country that we once were, because now we are reliant on other countries to provide us a vital part of life, which is food. In the wine industry, we've always been traditionalist. We've relied on tradition to sell our product. And we have younger generations that aren't as loyal to tradition as the older generations were. especially when you start talking about the boomers and the Gen X generation. They are loyal. You look at the millennial generation and our youngest wine drinking generation, the Z generation or the I generation, whatever you want to refer to them as. Not quite as loyal, especially the millennial generation. They are not as loyal to products as the previous generations before them. I'm hoping that as that generation continues to age and their families continue to grow, that loyalty comes back and comes as they get older. And the early look at the Z generation is they are loyal, but they are very, very, very consumed in life by health. And there are studies out there now that are saying alcohol is bad for you. Well, I'm of the opinion that everything that you do, if it's not in moderation, is probably not good for you. Look, my family's not scared of this. We are a partner in a new wine brand that we do believe is something that speaks to that generation of health. And I'll change my hat so you can see it. We are involved in a wine brand by the name of Avivo, and it is a brand where we are farming. We are using regenerative farming practices, certified organic, and they're lower alcohol wines because they're being picked at less ripeness, lower Brix, which is the sugar content in the wine. So you make a lower alcohol wine. For us, that speaks to the health side of what we're doing. We're treating our ground better. We're treating the fruit better. Also, the employees that are involved in the farming of those grapes are no longer spraying pesticides. They're spraying products that aren't harmful to them or their body or the environment. So all of those things that are happening in our industry are leading us hopefully down a path that allows us to market to the next generation that is much more worried about the healthy lifestyle of living and what alcohol means in that world. And so we're hoping that that's something that we can move forward with and hang our hat on and continue doing what we do.
Craig Ledbetter, fourth generation of California farmer. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you soon.